Hi, my name is Steve McAllister. Sometimes I go by Steve McAlphabet as an artist. And for the last 15 years or so, I've had this idea in my head that I've referred to as the Unbroken Path, where I started to take ideas like Joseph Campbell and his hero's journey, and I weaved it in with other different myths we have or ways of understanding our world. So it started off pretty good, and then I kind of took several years off of it, and I just did other stuff. It's rather heady in many ways, and I've not always lived as if I'm moving along this unbroken path. When I say the unbroken path, I'm talking about these different paradigms here. So my intention is to kind of share this idea with you out there in YouTube land, and hopefully in the real world we can talk more about it. And I want to talk about these paradigms that I've set up first, and then from here on out, I'll just keep talking my way through it, and hopefully it helps you. Hopefully it encourages you to move along this path to become the people we're supposed to be. That's my intention for it. That's my hope, and so I hope you dig it. Now, the first one on here, it kind of just fell into place that when I was putting this whole thing together, I created all of these cards, and they go down there for a ways, but there's 240 of them, all speaking to the different steps in these different paradigms. And as I assorted them and organized them where I could see a flow through it, they just kind of fell into 10 different phases. And it just so happens that the tree of life from Kabbalah, or Kabbalah, however you want to pronounce it, they have this tree of life symbol with these 10 sephirot on it. And so they kind of worked into the phases. So those are one of the paradigms. Secondly, we have in the Bible here, in Beatitudes, in Matthew, Jesus delivers the 8 Beatitudes, these 8 blessings for people who have a heart for God. So of course I had to include that because he was my very first spiritual teacher, and still teaches me things to this day. Then I have the Four Noble Truths to balance things out, because I wanted to look at Buddhism as well. And the Four Noble Truths lead to the Eightfold Path to righteousness, which I think is kind of interesting that Jesus had 8 Beatitudes and he had the Eightfold Path, kind of cool. So already I'm seeing a synergy there. And then went on to, it was in the 90s, I guess, the Celestine Prophecy was a huge bestseller, and it really opened people's eyes, or at least started them thinking along these lines of a greater spiritual existence in the world. And since then, people have still read it, and I thought that the insights in it were very interesting. And I met James Redfield many years ago when I was first traveling for the rucksack letters, so it just seemed synchronicitous to me, and I got to go with some synchronicity when I see it. So then we got the chakras from Hinduism and Buddhism. We have the most popular way of looking at the chakras are the 7 that come up our bodies. And so, of course, looked at those and see how those weave into helping us become who we are. And of course, that aligns with the 7 days of creation. Well, technically 6, if you're looking at just Genesis 1. And then the next chapter, he takes a day off and all hell breaks loose. So, but the first chapter of Genesis has these beautiful days of creation and talks about the different things that were made and now help support this life that we have. So I felt it was important to look at. And then, of course, I also have to look back at Christianity here, because people have used this for a weapon quite a bit. And to lead someone to evangelical Christianity, you have to take them down the Romans road. And these are 5 verses in the book of Romans, supposedly written by Paul, who never met Jesus or heard him preach or anything like that, but he had a situation. So he writes these books. Anyway, we'll talk about the Romans road as well. It's in there. But then more lately, I've met a woman by the name of Elizabeth who has written this book called The Sovereign Way. And it's just a really insightful way of looking at the message of Jesus Christ and the way of mastering our spiritual pursuits. And so she has the 8 masteries of the Sovereign Way. And when I read the book, I was one of the early readers, and I saw a lot of typos. And so I went through it twice and let her know about these typos, because I think it has something to be said. So I don't have a copy of it with me because I left it with her. But I recommend The Sovereign Way if you're a spiritual seeker and you still, like Jesus. He's a big part of that. So check it out. Then we have Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, this monomyth that he wrote about in Hero with 1,000 Faces, which I don't have a copy of. But he just kind of pointed out that everyone from Odysseus to Jesus to Luke Skywalker and Spider-Man go on the same steps. They touch on the same themes in these different stories, which I thought was always amazing. And we touch on these same themes as well along this unbroken path. And then we have the Fool's Journey of the Tarot. Now, tarot cards are really interesting. There are the main tarot, the Rider-Waite deck, has two different aspects to it. The two arcanas, a major arcana and a minor arcana. And the minor arcana are the four suits of cups, swords, wands, and coins, which align with heart, mind, body, and spirit, and all that. And it's really fascinating. And then they have the major arcana, which is the Fool's Journey. And it's this 22 different cards that kind of show the journey we're all on and all the different archetypes we face in our lives and how we reconcile ourselves with what life has to offer and use that to be able to claim our place in the world. So I thought that was fascinating. And then we have the 12-step program of the anonymous programs. Originally, it was Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's also been used for Narcotics Anonymous and Gambling Anonymous and Sexual something or other Anonymous. I don't know, a lot of Anonymous is out there, but there's a program of finding your way through the recovery of whatever it is that you've been struggling with, whatever addiction has gotten a hold of you. And then looked at James Prochaska and I forget De Clemente's name, but he was one of the initial researchers that looked at this theory of change. And they work with a lot of people in social work and who struggle with addictions. And they talk about these different steps that these people make and where they see real improvement. So I thought I was really interested in checking them out. And we also have Otto Scharmer, who wrote Theory U. I think there are a couple of people maybe, but fascinating book also about change. And it's thinking with the future in mind. So as you can see, it's got this U shape, which is a theory where you start up and then you could get better like that, But it's about open mind, open heart, open will, which is kind of what Jesus said you need to offer to the world, your heart, mind, body, and strength. So pretty cool there. So I like change a lot. And then I found out about this guy named Bill Moyer, who back in, I think, 60s, he did a lot of tracking and research on various social movements, from women's suffrage to civil rights and all that. And he saw these various steps that these social movements take. And so I found that really fascinating as well. And then Bruce Tuckman was a guy who maybe he was in the 60s. I think Moyer was in the 80s. Either way, Tuckman did a thing on the steps of group development, how a group comes together to make a social change or whatever they want to do, and then where it goes from there. So I thought that was interesting. Getting into popular culture, Stephen Covey, I really enjoyed his 7 habits of highly effective people, and then the 8th habit as well. I haven't always practiced them, obviously, but I do really appreciate them, and I think that they're important to work into this narrative. Also, similar to that, initially Don Miguel Ruiz wrote 4 Agreements, which was a fantastic book about really just simple insights from Toltec wisdom. And then later on, he and his son added the 5th Agreement, which I thought was also quite compelling, and also I think works into this narrative that I'm finding. Then I got into psychology. I have a degree in psychology, and it hasn't done me a whole lot of good, other than helping me to understand people a little bit. But Carl Jung was one of the psychologists I really appreciated, because he originated this idea of synchronicity, and he really expanded on the archetypes that we face in the world, and was just a fascinating person. So I've got Jung in there because he had the stages of life, what he called just the stages of life that we go through from childhood to old age. And then you had Erik Erikson. Well, you know what? I missed one. Transition. Back here between the Tuckman's group development and the 8 habits, we have the transition movement. Started 20 years ago or so, where Rob Hopkins wrote the transition handbook. And it was kind of a way, what their intention was there, to move to a world without oil. So we're not completely dependent upon digging up the whole planet and sucking it dry, because if we do, well, we're the next fossil fuels. So we might want to temper that. But the transition movement has grown to be something much more than that, and have really focused on creating transition towns who focus on their local culture, their local infrastructure, their local food, and local energy. And so Don Hall started Transition Sarasota here where I live years ago, and he's moved back to Boulder, Colorado, and has been working on this book, The Regeneration Handbook, for several years. And it's a really great read. It was very inspirational and getting me back on this Unbroken Path thing. So I highly recommend that if you're looking to how we can create a more sustainable, regenerative world. The Regeneration Handbook is one you've got to pick up. So anyway, back to Jung and psychology. I also looked at Erik Erikson, who his theory of psychosocial development was based on the idea that we each have these conflicts that come into our lives. So all of his are trust versus mistrust, and autonomy versus shame and doubt, things like that, where you have these times in our lives where we have to struggle with whether we trust the world or not, whether we're going to be participating and living our best lives. So I thought he was really necessary. And then you got Freud. You can't talk about psychology without Freud. And he had the psychosexual development, largely in young adulthood. And then it just goes off from there. But anyway, yeah, you got to include him in there. So Freud is in here. And really, one of the seminal psychologists was Abraham Maslow, who didn't look at people who were suffering from pathologies like the other guys did, but who looked more at people who were succeeding and doing well and what their secrets were. And so he created this hierarchy of needs, which is not like a hierarchy of our government and stuff. This is a different type of hierarchy that actually can show us how to grow and how to move and how life builds on itself, like the natural hierarchies in the world around us. But anyway, so it starts out, with basically the basic physiological needs. You need water, you need food, you need shelter, and then safety and security, and on up to there, up to self-actualization, where we become the people we know we were meant to be, and we can fully live our true lives. And then later on in his life, he had his self-transcendence, where we, become enlightened, I guess you call it, as Christ, is another way of looking at it. And again, looking at the Celestine insights, that's kind of what it guides to, is that, moving beyond our egos altogether. And then I looked at spiral dynamics, which was also very, very much in line with Ken Wilber, who has written many books, but they both have these ideas of the different values people have had throughout existence, and so they color code them. I think there's 8 in each one, but they really talk about where we came from since we were nomadic hunters to when we started becoming more agrarian, and then developing into agriculture and governments and city-states and religions, and how that's played a part in it to where we've gotten now, to where we've gotten our cancel culture, and then moving into a more integral way of looking at things, and we've got to appreciate all of humanity for what it has offered us to get us to this point, and embrace it and love it for what it is, and forgive anything that we might think that they shouldn't have done along the way because they didn't have the same insights that we do, and start to integrate the people who still think the ways that we have in the past, even though they haven't embraced a greater worldview. So finding our way to integral, I think, is a very important thing, which is another reason I put this path together. And then I looked at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her research on grief, because we are all going through a great amount of grief, it seems. And so the stages of grief that we have to go through are also part of this healing process of the Unbroken Path that bring us to who we are. And finally, David Hawkins wrote a book called Power versus Force, one called The Eye of the I, one called just I. And he's written a few of those different books, but in his theory, in his studies of kinesiology, which is kind of the body's response to truth. So it's kind of the way he phrases that. But he has created these stages of consciousness, or levels of consciousness, or he didn't create them. He kind of identified them and qualified them through vibrational resonance. So I found it really fascinating that we have, this lowest vibration of shame, where a lot of people live their lives, where I've lived many moments of my life, oftentimes self-inflicted, but we go through that and feel we don't deserve anything. We don't deserve the love of God, the love of people. We don't deserve success. And moving up the levels of consciousness, we finally come into this state of courage, where it seemed people were, like in the 80s or so. And we may be devolving a little bit, I don't know. But we could move into neutrality, on up to love and peace and joy and enlightenment. So I found that really fascinating. And I think it plays into this whole unbroken path that we're all on as we move our way out of the lower base vibrations of our lower selves into the higher vibrations of our higher selves. So that is my intention for this whole unbroken path. And my intention is to share a new video every day. They may be edited, they may not be. But I hope they engage some conversation, and I hope they allow for some understanding. If you're remotely interested, on my webpage, stevemc.xyz, I do have a free download of PDF if you would like to read it. It's 122 pages right now, only 45,000 words, and I may do some editing on it and more rewriting later on, but I would love feedback if you're interested in this sort of thing. So please go to stevemc.xyz and get your free download. Watch some of the videos there about some of the other things that I do. And my intention is to, again, motorcycle across the country or around the country somewhere this summertime. So if I can connect with you wherever you are in the real world, that'd be fantastic. Let me know if I can come play some music for you or write you some poetry or do something else that I do. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later on. Thanks a lot.